Welcome to Wits and Wisdom, a podcast sharing insights, innovations, and inspiration from the award-winning Women in Tech Summit. I'm Celine Dirks, executive producer of Wits and Wisdom, and on this special mini-episode, we're bringing you a never-before-published excerpt from Bobbie Carlton, featuring the best of her advice for speakers and presenters. She covers practical tips for preparation, offers solace to speakers suffering from stage fright, and drops a hot take about an unexpected personality trait she thinks produces excellent speakers. But let's start at the beginning. Why speak at all? Bobbie takes it from here.
I think everything around public speaking should be considered in light of what your goals are. Do you want to move ahead in your career? Do you want to build up an audience for your business? Do you want to become known as a thought leader or an expert? Like, those are kind of the first steps in any kind of marketing program, setting up what your goals are. And your goals will influence the type of speaking you do. They will also influence the audiences that you seek out. For example, my background is public relations. So a lot of people will think that I should be seeking out opportunities at the PRSA, which is the Public Relations Society of America. And I say, that's probably not the best audience for me, because that audience is going to be filled with more competitors to my PR business than possible customers. Because my public relations business, we support entrepreneurs, startups, and small companies, they're probably not going to be in the audience at the PRSA. I'm better off speaking at a technical event or a startup event for the PR part of my business. So just think about where your audience might be.
That is great advice, and probably not something that most people would think about right away. They are going to think, where is the place that makes the most sense? So great piece of advice, Bobbie. Thank you. For our listeners who are nervous about the thought of speaking, what advice would you give them?
Number one, we're all nervous. Even the most experienced speakers have that moment, where you're about to go on stage and you're like, oh my goodness, flutter, flutter, flutter. Don't worry. You're not alone. We all think of that same way. It's not unusual. Number two, if you do get that kind of nervous flush or flutter, think about it this way. It's your body's way of reacting to the excitement of the moment. So think about it as excitement, not necessarily nervousness. Reframe. And also take a deep breath. If you've practiced enough times, these things will flow. I feel like a lot of speakers have a magic number. If they have run through their presentation, I say 8 times. 8 times for me, I'm golden. There are presentations that I've gotten off stage and I'm like, I have no idea what I just said. But I've practiced enough times to know that I probably was pretty good and I got through the points that I wanted to get through. I've done that presentation enough times to flow with it. I often recommend that people who are introverts seriously consider public speaking. Usually I get looked at like I have 2 heads when I make this recommendation, but introverts tend to have spent their entire lives thinking they should not be public speakers. I beg to differ, because introverts are more likely than extroverts to be well prepared and prepare themselves. They will practice. They will do the research. They will prepare themselves. Whereas someone who is an extrovert tends to be a little bit more likely to wing it. These are generally the people that you watch preparing their slides on the airplane. So highly recommend introverts as public speakers, even if you think it sounds somewhat counterintuitive. You can also break down your presentation into chunks If anybody has ever heard me talk about my companies, Innovation Nights or Innovation Women, you start to recognize chunks and phrases that I will use over and over again. I practice them and I've used them time and time again. And I know what gets a reaction or what is information that people pick up on easily. I also tend to tell people that less is more. Don't try and stuff everything you know into your presentations. Focus on one or two ideas and make sure that people understand those. You don't have to tell everybody everything. Give them something that they can ask you questions about. Nobody likes it when you're at the end of a presentation and you say, okay, I'm done. Any questions? And there's crickets, right? So if you tell them everything, they won't have any questions to ask you.
I always want to leave them with something to think about.
Prepare your presentation. Watch other people present. We all have access to things like TED and TEDx. These are great examples of really good speaking. Great examples of very good presentation and presentation skills. And so go to school on other great presenters. If you've been to a conference before and you weren't a speaker, you were a member of the audience, you probably see things or remember seeing things that drew you in, things that got you excited. What were those things? Think about how you can employ those tactics and techniques in your own presentations. So just because you haven't done this before doesn't mean you haven't been exposed to it, and it doesn't mean it can't be learned.
I think we all remember those really great speakers or the really bad speakers that we've seen, and those things stick with us. We just have to try and remember to emulate or not emulate those things.
Okay, I've given this presentation. I'm going to give it again, and how can I make it better? So each time you give a presentation, think about what you did that could be better next time, or what you could add, or even better, what you could subtract. If you are doing something in your presentations that isn't working or that isn't adding value, what can you take away? So just little lessons there.
Thanks for joining us for this special episode. If you enjoyed this bite-sized excerpt, consider sending it to an introvert you think would make a great public speaker. You can also see the most up-to-date summit schedule, call for speakers, and news from the Women in Tech Summit at womenintechsummit.com. That's womenintechsummit.com. If you really like the show, you can also learn how to sponsor or guest here on Wits and Wisdom. We hope to see you again soon for more insight, innovation, and inspiration.